Hello and welcome back to the Starting 5 video series. My name's Adam Spencer. You can find me on Twitter at SDS Basketball or at AdamSpencer4. In today's video, we're going to be discussing the 6 teams in the SEC that are currently in the NCAA tournament picture as projected by Joe Lunardi of ESPN and some others, and we're going to discuss what their biggest weaknesses are, what's going to hold them back when we flip our calendars to March. Those teams, of course, are Alabama, Arkansas, Florida, Missouri, Tennessee, and LSU, in no particular order. In most projections, they're between number 1 seeds for Alabama, which is really incredible when you think about what Nate Oates' team has accomplished this year, all the way down to like 11 seeds to the tournament bubble for teams like LSU and Arkansas. So why don't we just start at the top and dive right into Alabama? I reached out on Twitter to ask you guys what your thoughts are on your team's biggest weaknesses, so let's dive into one from Alabama. Aaron Henderson says, "Our health at Alabama. If we were good, we'd be dynamite." Hard to argue with that based on the results so far. Jeffrey says, "Ability to stay healthy and finding points when the three isn't falling." Now I'd agree with that, but they also showed recently against LSU that they can get to the paint when they need to. LSU was running them off the three-point line and they still got plenty of points in that game. It wasn't as dynamic of an offensive performance as we're used to seeing from them during conference play, so I'm gonna go with streakiness as my biggest weakness for Alabama. Health is a big part of that, of course, but in 8 of their first 9 SEC games, they amassed more than 80 points. Now they've gone 3 straight games without hitting that mark. Of course, they're 2-1 in those games, so they're still doing pretty well for themselves, but it really hurt them, their offensive inefficiency against Oklahoma. And the Sooners are a really good team, but I'd like to see them get more consistently to that 80-point mark because they're almost unbeatable when they get there, because their defense is elite, and that doesn't get talked about enough. Next, we come to Arkansas. Daniel Parham says, "Arkansas has games where we can't guard a stick and can't make a layup, but we also have games where we are one of the best out there. Don't know who shows up." Now, I absolutely 100% agree with that take from Daniel. That is absolutely their biggest weakness. If they're going to stay in the tournament picture, they're going to need a big win here at some point, and so far they just don't have anything that pads their resume. Yeah, 2 wins over Auburn is nice, but Auburn's inconsistent, and they're banned from the postseason this year, so I want to see them beat one of the top teams in the SEC, pull off an upset against Alabama. Take down LSU, take down Florida, take down Mizzou, take down Tennessee. Just get a big win on your resume, and so far they haven't done that, and it's because, like Daniel said, of that inconsistency. There's been a game where they just couldn't make a layup to save their lives, and that's going to hurt them down the stretch if they can't play more consistently from all aspects of the game. Defensively, 3-point, in the paint, they've just got to be better. Next, we come to Florida. We got a lot of responses from Florida fans out there who are very frustrated and confused by this team this year. Marcus Reeves says, "Obviously losing Keontae makes it so that it's tougher for us to go attack the middle of a zone defense. If a team is super long, comfortable playing zone, we could be in trouble as so much of our offense comes from paint points." Now, Peyton Mitchell put it much more succinctly. He says, "Their biggest problem is having Mike White as a coach." Now, I think that Mike White has coached himself off of the hot seat with a recent 4-game winning streak, but then the Gators turn around and go and lose to South Carolina, who I recently had dead last in my SEC power rankings. Those are the kinds of losses that are causing Florida fans to tear their hair out. You never know when that's going to pop up, and if it pops up in the SEC tournament or the NCAA tournament, that's going to be a problem. Could they lose in Nashville to Vanderbilt in the SEC tournament? Absolutely. Could they go on a run and win it all? Yeah. And could they get a 2 seed or a 3 seed and then lose in the first round? Anything's possible with this team. They're just not good at handling success when it comes their way. 4-game winning streak, great win over number 11 West Virginia in Morgantown, doesn't matter. They come back and lose in embarrassing fashion to South Carolina. And the South Carolina team, just as an aside, they're good. I just don't know what to make of them. So they're absolutely a team that could go on a run in Nashville and win the SEC tournament, or they could go out in the first round. Who knows? That brings us to LSU. The Tigers' biggest weakness is defense. Right now in the nation, KenPom.com has them ranked 139th in the nation in defensive efficiency. I don't need to tell you that that's not good, especially when it's compared to the other SEC teams. They've also allowed the most 3-pointers in the SEC this year, and a lot of that comes from playing Alabama twice. We all remember the 23 3-pointer game that Alabama hung on LSU, but they also are 10th in points allowed, so they do have some work to do on that side of the ball, and if they don't work on their defensive efficiency and just getting stops in key situations when they need it, they're gonna lose to a team like Alabama in the NCAA tournament and probably in one of the early rounds too. Next up, we have the Missouri Tigers, who have been one of the bigger surprises of the SEC season so far. Konzo Martin's squad, what's their biggest weakness? I'm going with 3-point shooting, and a lot of people agree with me. Justin Wiles on Twitter says, consistent scoring and 3-point shooting, and apparently playing defense against average Big 12 teams. That's obviously in reference to the tough overtime game that they had against TCU in the SEC Big 12 Challenge. As thrilling as it was, Mizzou had no business being in that close of a game and allowing that many points to TCU in Columbia. So I agree with that, and actually, Mizzou has gotten a little bit better recently with 3-point shooting, but that's mostly because Xavier Pinson has been really hot. I mean, just look at the end of that TCU game where he had 3 clutch threes in the last couple of minutes. They're now up to 11th place in the SEC in terms of 3-point percentage, but they're still only making 31% of their long-range attempts. And when you get to March, you're going to have teams that are hot from 3-point land, and if you can't hang with them a little bit, then you're going to get blown out. That could happen against a team like Alabama or Arkansas in the SEC tournament, or it could happen against anyone in the NCAA tournament, depending on the draws. We've seen a lot of times when bad matchups in the early rounds have plagued some higher seeded teams, and Mizzou could be in danger of that if they get a hot shooting 3-point mid-major team. And if they can't improve their 3-point percentage moving forward, then they're going to be susceptible to some upset losses. Last but certainly not least, because we're going in alphabetical order here, we have the Tennessee Volunteers. This is another team, like Florida, that has fans pulling their hair out because of their inconsistency. But this has more to do, the big problem with the Vols is offense and just shooting efficiency. Justin Hope on Twitter says, wildly inconsistent outside shooting, no physical offensive presence in the paint. And yeah, that's something that I agree with. I think John Fulkerson has been really inconsistent this year, which is frustrating, and even Coach Rick Barnes has said something about that in a recent press conference after that 52-50 loss at Ole Miss, which was one of the worst losses of the year for any team that's on the tournament bubble, and that was one of the worst losses of the SEC season for one of the SEC powers. The Vols just at times seem lost on offense. Just when you think they're starting to put it back together, nope, they go down and they score 50 points against the Rebels. That's just not good. Ole Miss is a good defensive team, but they're not that good of a defense. It wasn't too long ago that Tennessee had Final Four aspirations, so that's just not a loss you can have on your resume at Ole Miss. They're averaging only 71.8 points per game right now, which is 10th in the SEC. So if they get behind early in a tournament game, it's going to be tough for them to come back if they're not firing on all cylinders, and they haven't been that often this year. So which teams will be able to overcome their weakness? Well, we'll find that out in March.